The complete works of Swami Vivekananda, Jnana Yoga, Chapter 3, Maya and Illusion, Part 1. Almost all of you have heard of the word Maya. Generally, it is used, though incorrectly, to denote illusion or delusion or some such thing. But the theory of Maya forms one of the pillars upon which Vedanta rests. It is therefore necessary that it should be properly understood. I ask a little patience of you, for there is a great danger of its being misunderstood. The oldest idea of Maya that we find in the Vedic literature is in the sense of delusion. But then the real theory had not been reached. We find such passages as Indra through his Maya assumed various forms. Here it is true that the word Maya means something like magic, and we find various other passages always taking the same meaning. The word Maya then dropped out of sight altogether. But in the meantime, the idea was developing. Later, the question was raised, why can't we know the secret of the universe? And the answer given was very significant. Because we talk in vain, and because we are satisfied with the things of the senses, and because we are running after desires. Therefore, we are, as it were, cover the reality with a mist. Here the word Maya is not used at all. But we all get the idea that the cause of our ignorance is a kind of a mist that has come between us and the truth. Much later on, in one of the latest Upanishads, we find the word Maya reappearing. But this time a transformation had taken place. A mass of new meaning had been attached to the word. Theories had been propounded and repeated. Others had been taken up, until at last the idea of Maya became fixed. We read in the Shvetansh Vatara Upanishad, know nature to be Maya, and the ruler of this Maya is the Lord Himself. Coming to our philosophers, we find that this word Maya has been manipulated in various fashions until we come to the great Shankaracharya. The theory of Maya was manipulated a little by the Buddhists too, but in the hands of the Buddhists it became very much like what it is called idealism. And that is the meaning that is now generally given to the word Maya. When the Hindu says the word is Maya, at once people get the idea that the world is an illusion. This interpretation has some basis as coming through the Buddhist philosophers, because there was one section of philosophers who did not believe in the external world at all. But the Maya of the Vedanta in its last developed form is neither idealism nor realism, nor is it a theory. It is a simple statement of facts, what we are and what we see around us. As I have told you before, the minds of the people from whom the Vedas came were intent upon the following principles, discovering principles. They had no time to work upon details or to wait for them. They wanted to go deep into the heart of the things. Something beyond was calling them, as it were, and they could not wait. Scattered through the Upanishads, we find that the details of the subjects, which we now call modern sciences, are very often erroneous, but at the same time, their principles are correct. For instance, the idea of ether, which is one of the latest theories of modern science, is to be found in our ancient literature in forms much more developed than is the modern scientific theory of weather today. But it was in principle. When they tried to demonstrate the workings of that principle, they made many mistakes. The theory of the all-pervading life principle, of which all life in this universe is but a differing manifestation, was understood in Vedic times. It is found in the Brahmanas. There is a long hymn in the Samahitas in praise of Prana, of which all life is but a manifestation. By the by, it may interest some of you to know that there are theories in the Vedic philosophy about the origin of life on this earth, very similar to those which have been advanced by some modern European scientists. You, of course, all know that there is a theory that life came from other planets. It is a settled doctrine with some Vedic philosophers that life comes in this way from the moon. Coming to the principles, we find these Vedic thinkers very courageous and wonderfully bold in propounding large and generalized theories. Their solution of the mystery of the universe from the external world was as satisfactory as it could be. The detailed workings of modern science do not bring the question one step nearer to the solution, because the principles have failed. If the theory of weather failed in ancient times to give a solution to the mystery of the universe, working out the details of that other theory would not bring us much nearer to the truth. If the theory of all-pervading life failed as a theory of this universe, it would not mean anything more if worked out in detail, for the details do not change the principle of the universe. What I mean to say is that in their inquiry into the principle, the Hindu thinkers were as bold and in some cases much bolder than the moderns. They made some of the grandest generalizations that have yet not been reached, and in some still remain as theories which modern science has yet to even get as theories. For instance, they not only arrived at other theory, but went beyond and classified mind also as a still more rarefied other. Beyond that again they found a still more rarefied other. Yet that was no solution. It did not solve the problem. No amount of knowledge of the external world could solve the problem. But, says the scientist, we are just beginning to know a little. Wait a few thousand years and we shall get the solution. No, says the Vedantist, for he has proved beyond all doubt that the mind is limited, that it cannot go beyond certain limits, beyond time, space, and causation. As no man can jump out of his own self, so also no man can go beyond the limits that have been put upon him by the laws of time and space. Every attempt to solve the laws of causation, time, and space would be futile, because the very attempt would have to be made by taking for granted the existence of these three. What does the statement of existence of the world mean then? This world has no existence. What is meant by that? It means that it has no absolute existence. It exists only in relation to my mind, to your mind, and to the mind of everyone else. We see this world with the five senses, but if we had another sense, we would see it in it something more. If we had it yet another sense, it would appear as something still different. It has therefore no real existence. It is not unchangeable, not immovable, infinite existence. Nor can it be called non-existence, seeing that it exists and we slave to work in and through it. It is a mixture of existence and non existence. Coming from abstractions to the common, everyday details of our lives, we find that our whole life is a contradiction, a mixture of existence and non existence. There is this contradiction in knowledge. It seems that man can know everything if he only wants to know. But before he has gone a few steps, he finds an adamantine wall through which he cannot pass. All his work is in a circle and he cannot go beyond that circle. The problems which are nearest and dearest to him are impelling him on and calling day and night for a solution. But he cannot solve them because he cannot go beyond his intellect. And yet that desire is implanted strongly in him. Still, we know that the only good is to be obtained by controlling and checking it. With every breath, every impulse in our heart asks us to be selfish. At the same time, there is some power beyond us which says that it is unselfishness alone which is good. Every child is a born optimist. The golden dreams. In youth, he becomes still more optimistic. It is hard for a young man to believe that there is such a thing as death, such a thing as defeat or degradation. Old age comes and life is a mass of ruins. Dreams have vanished into the air and the man becomes a pessimist. Thus we go from one extreme to another, buffeted by nature without knowing where we are going. It reminds me of a celebrated song in the Lalita Vistara, the biography of Buddha. Buddha was born, says the book, as the savior of mankind, but he forgot himself in the luxuries of his palace. Some aliens came and sang a song to rouse him, and the burdens of the whole song is that we are floating down the river of life, which is continually changing with no stop and no rest. So also our lives are going on and on without knowing any rest. What are we to do? The man who has enough to eat and drink is an optimist, and he avoids all mention of misery, for it frightens him. Tell him not to him of the sorrows and the sufferings of the world. Go to him and tell him that it is all good. Yes, I am safe, he says. Look at me. I have a nice house to live in. I do not fear cold and hunger. Therefore, do not bring these horrible pictures before me. But on the other hand, there are others dying of cold and hunger. If you go and teach them that it is all good, they will not hear you. How can they wish others to be happy when they are themselves miserable? Thus, we are oscillating between optimism and pessimism. Then there is a tremendous fact of death. The whole world is going to die. Everything dies. All our progress, our vanities, our reforms, our luxuries, our wealth, our knowledge have that one end, death. That is all that is certain. Cities go on, come and go, empires rise and fall, planets break into pieces and crumble into dust, to be blown away by the atmospheres of other planets. Thus it has been going on for time without beginning. Death is the end of everything. Death is the end of life, of beauty, of wealth, of power, of virtue too. Saints die and sinners die. Kings die and beggars die. They are all going to death. And yet this tremendous clinging on to life exists. Somehow we do not know why we cling to life. We cannot give it up. And this is Maya. The mother is nursing a child with great care. All her soul, her life is in that child. The child grows, becomes a man, and perchance becomes a blackguard and a brute. He kicks her and beats her every day. And yet the mother clings to the child, and when her reason awakes, she covers it up with the idea of love. She little thinks that it is not love, that it is something which has got hold of her nerves. which she cannot shake off, however she may try. She cannot shake off the bondage she is in. And this bondage is Maya.